It was just another morning in the vast, untamed wilderness of Montana, the kind of morning where the mist clings to the treetops like a secret, and the silence feels like it's holding its breath. Sarah Mitchell had driven these winding forest roads dozens of times before, camera gear loaded in the back of her dusty Jeep, always on the lookout for a perfect shot, an elk in the morning light, a hawk in mid-dive. But today, the forest had something else waiting for her, something no lens could truly capture. As she rounded a curve flanked by towering pines, something odd caught her eye, a shape, small and still, lying at the edge of the road. At first her heart sank. Too often she'd seen wildlife struck down by cars. Their stories ended in silence. But this time, the story was just beginning. She pulled over and stepped out into the damp morning air. The shape was a puppy, a German shepherd, no older than 8 weeks, all skin and bones beneath a coat of dirty, matted fur. His baby blue eyes blinked up at her, not with fear, but with something harder to define, a pleading, fragile kind of hope. Before she could reach for him, the underbrush rustled. A fox emerged, sleek, red, and alert. Its amber eyes locked onto the puppy, and Sarah froze. A wild fox this close to a weakened animal meant only one thing. She was about to witness nature at its rawest. The circle of life, unsentimental and brutal. The fox crept closer, muscles coiled in silence. Sarah's camera was still in the car, too far to help. Her instincts screamed to intervene, to shout, to scare the predator away. But something about the scene held her in place. Then the fox stopped. It tilted its head, not in hunger, but in curiosity. It sniffed the air and then, with movements almost too gentle to be real, nudged the puppy with its nose. The pup didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned in, Sarah's breath caught. In that one moment, everything she thought she understood about the natural order unraveled. The fox didn't bite. She licked the pup's ear. Sarah had seen thousands of moments in the wild, births, hunts, deaths. But this was different. This was the beginning of something utterly inexplicable, a connection born not of instinct, but of something deeper. She didn't know it yet, but what she had stumbled upon was a story that would challenge everything she knew about survival, motherhood, and the fragile lines that divide predator from prey. And it all began here in the mist with a camera left behind, and a fox that chose love over hunger. The forest was silent, but not empty. Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the roadside, the morning mist curling around her ankles like a living thing. Her breath fogged the crisp Montana air as she stared at the scene before her. A German shepherd, puppy, tiny, emaciated, barely breathing, lay crumpled in a patch of dew-drenched moss. His fur, once likely thick and glossy, was now matted and tangled, a canvas of dirt and despair. He couldn't have been more than 8 weeks old. She took a slow step forward, heart aching. "Hey there, little guy," she whispered, voice soft. As the wind threading through the trees, that's when the rustling began. At first it was just a faint stirring, leaves brushing against one another, a shift in the brush. Then from the shadows, a figure emerged, red, silent, watching. A fox, its coat glowed like embers in the slanted morning light, eyes the color of polished amber. It stepped cautiously into the clearing, its gaze locked not on Sarah, but on the helpless puppy at her feet. Time stilled. Sarah knew enough about wildlife to recognize the weight of the moment. Foxes were rarely a threat to domestic dogs, especially not full-grown ones. But this puppy was no match for anything. He was too weak to stand, too tired to cry. If the fox decided to strike, there'd be no defense. Sarah's instincts screamed at her to intervene, to wave her arms, to shout. But her body wouldn't move. Something held her in place, a tension in the air, a sense that whatever was about to unfold was bigger than fear. The fox crept closer. Its body was low to the ground, movement fluid and measured, like a flame drawn toward oxygen. It circled the puppy once, then paused. Its ears twitched. Its nose twitched. Then, with a sudden gentleness that stole the breath from Sarah's lungs, the fox lowered its snout and nudged the puppy softly. The pup stirred, let out the faintest of whimpers, and unbelievably nuzzled back. Sarah blinked, unsure if she was seeing clearly. But the fox was now grooming the puppy, licking the dirt from his ears, smoothing the twisted tufts of fur along his spine. Not as a predator claiming prey, as a mother might care for her own young. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This was no random moment. This was something sacred, something impossible. She slowly crouched, reaching into her bag for her phone. Her DSLR was in the back of the car, too far away. But she needed to record this. Even if no one believed her, she had to try. Her fingers trembled as she hit record. The fox, undisturbed, continued grooming the pup, then curled her body protectively around him. The pup, whom Sarah now found herself calling Ranger in her mind, let out a tired sigh and closed his eyes. His tiny frame rose and fell with shallow breaths, pressed into the fox's warmth. Sarah watched, tears welling in her eyes. This wasn't biology. This wasn't about instinct. This was something else, something that made no sense in a world of survival and scarcity. She whispered, barely audible, "Why are you helping him?" The fox seemed to hear. Her ears swiveled. She looked up, not at Sarah but toward the trees, as if sensing something distant and important. Then she stood and looked back at the puppy. She took a step toward the woods, then paused, waiting. Ranger stirred, tried to rise. His legs shook, collapsed. The fox returned to his side and nudged him again, gently but firmly. She wasn't giving up on him. He tried once more, this time managing a few wobbly steps. Sarah followed at a distance, camera still rolling. The puppy leaned against the fox as they walked, each step a battle. The fox matched his pace, moving slowly, patiently. Her tail brushed his side, steadying him. They moved deeper into the forest. The light shifted from gold to green, filtered through the canopy above. Birds watched from branches. Squirrels froze mid-scurry. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. Eventually, they arrived at the base of a massive oak tree, its roots twisted like ancient fingers into the earth. Beneath it, partially hidden, was the fox's den, and then 3 tiny fox kits emerged. They were small, still fuzzy with youth, eyes wide and ears perked. They sniffed the air, yipped softly, then turned their attention to the strange new arrival. Sarah could hardly breathe. The mother fox gave Ranger one last encouraging nudge, then stepped back. The kits approached, cautious but curious. One nipped at his tail, another pressed its nose to his. The third simply sat and watched. Ranger didn't resist. He didn't growl or snap. He wagged his tail, a weak, uncertain wag, but a gesture of peace nonetheless. And just like that, the lines blurred. Predator, prey, wild, domestic. None of it mattered. Sarah sat down in the undergrowth, stunned. She had just witnessed the impossible. A fox welcoming a dog into her den, her kits embracing a creature they should have feared. It was more than survival. It was a choice rooted in compassion, not convenience. She reached for her camera again, whispering, "The world has to see this." But even as she filmed, a thought gnawed at the edges of her mind. This was beautiful, yes, but fragile. How long could this last? How would other predators react? And what would happen when Ranger grew stronger, bigger, too big for a fox den? The questions piled up, but Sarah knew one thing for certain: she would return. Not just as a photographer, but as a witness to something rare and precious. Something wild, yes, but also deeply, achingly human. Sarah had documented animal behavior for nearly a decade. She'd filmed eagles in flight, elk herds in migration, and once captured a rare scene of a lynx stalking through winter snow. But never, in all her years behind the lens, had she seen anything like this. The fox and the puppy, Ranger, had disappeared into the brush. moving with slow determination toward something Sarah could only guess. She followed from a respectful distance, crouching low and stepping lightly, her camera still rolling. She didn't dare call out or intervene. She was witnessing something far too delicate to disrupt. The forest was alive with morning sounds, the whistle of birds, the distant snap of twigs, the hum of wind rustling through fir trees. But Sarah's focus was solely on the unlikely pair. Ahead of her, the fox walked with practiced elegance, her steps measured. Ranger stumbled along beside her, occasionally faltering, his larger frame awkward compared to her sleek form. When they reached a shallow clearing nestled beneath a massive oak, Sarah slowed her pace. The tree's roots curled outward like ancient arms, and beneath them, half hidden by fallen leaves and soft soil, was a den. Then, movement. 3 tiny fox kits emerged from the shadows, their wide eyes blinking against the new light. They were smaller than Ranger, but not by much. They sniffed the air, alert and curious, ears perked as they noticed their mother, and the strange creature she had brought home. Sarah held her breath. The fox nudged Ranger forward. He hesitated, then slowly padded toward the den. The kits didn't back away. Instead, they approached, one paw at a time, circling him like children inspecting a new sibling. One let out a high-pitched yip, another pounced clumsily at Ranger's tail. And then, it happened. They accepted him. Not with words, of course, but with the unspoken language of touch, proximity, and trust. Within moments, the kits were tumbling. Around him, climbing over his back, nudging him playfully. Ranger responded with a gentle paw bat, a clumsy wag of his tail. It was as if he instinctively understood the rules of their world. Sarah sat back in the undergrowth, utterly spellbound. This wasn't just a fox taking pity on a lost pup. This was full integration. Ranger had been adopted, fully, openly, into a family that wasn't his by species, but was now his by choice. The fox mother, whom Sarah now mentally named Ruby, watched with calm, guarded eyes. She lay nearby, tail curled around her body, alert but not alarmed. Every so often she would glance toward Sarah's direction, acknowledging her presence but never retreating. Hours passed. Sarah stayed still, recording as much as she could. Ruby nursed her kits, grooming each one in turn, including Ranger. When the others settled into sleep, the puppy lay close beside her, his breathing deep and even. He was safe, accepted, and, perhaps for the first time in days, no longer alone. But Sarah's wonder was soon shadowed by reality. The forest was no sanctuary. It was a battleground of survival, and this strange new family was vulnerable. From her vantage point, she noticed something that made her skin prickle. Deep, broad paw prints, etched into the soft earth near the clearing. Not fox, not deer, coyote. And overhead a hawk circled. Predators were closing in, drawn by the unusual noises, perhaps even by the scent of the German shepherd. A pup that size, larger than any fox kit, was a tempting target, and Ruby couldn't defend them all forever. Sarah faced an impossible question. Should she step in, remove Ranger, and offer him safety at the cost of this fragile bond? Or should she remain a silent observer, trusting nature to unfold its strange, miraculous story on its own terms? That night, she returned to her cabin conflicted. She replayed the footage over and over, hoping the answers might reveal themselves in slow motion. But the questions only multiplied. What if she waited too long? What if the very act of watching cost them everything? By morning, she made a decision. She packed extra food, raw meat for the fox family, soft kibble soaked in broth for Ranger, and returned to the den. But she didn't bring a leash. She didn't bring a carrier. She wasn't there to rescue anyone. Not yet. Instead, she set up a wildlife blind a few hundred feet from the den, concealed beneath layers of pine boughs and canvas. From there, she would observe, record, and, if needed, intervene. Over the next week, she returned daily. Each visit brought new revelations. She watched Ruby hunt, swift and efficient, returning with small prey, mice, a bird, once even a snake. She tore the meals into small pieces, distributing them among her young. And without hesitation, she fed Ranger too. He accepted the food awkwardly at first, unsure of what to do with raw flesh. But hunger is a powerful teacher. Soon he was eating beside the kits, mimicking their movements, learning from their instincts. Sarah documented every moment. Ranger's slow transformation from abandoned pet to wild learner. The way his legs grew steadier, his reactions sharper. He learned to crouch low like the kits, to move silently through the grass. Though his paws were larger, his frame heavier, he was adapting. And yet he was still different. His bark, when it occasionally escaped, echoed through the forest like a warning shot. Ruby would flick her ears in frustration, sometimes nudging him to quiet down. He tried. But instinct clashed with adaptation. Still, the bond deepened. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of rose and indigo, Sarah witnessed a moment that froze her in place. Ranger curled beside Ruby, her muzzle resting on his flank. The kits climbed over them both, a tangled pile of red fur and shepherd tan. It was more than coexistence. It was family, and Sarah knew deep in her chest that she was no longer just documenting something rare. She was witnessing something never seen before, a story that could change how the world saw animals, instincts, and the very meaning of kinship. But even miracles are fragile, and the deeper she followed this story, the more she sensed that the hardest part hadn't yet begun. Ranger was growing fast, faster than Sarah had anticipated. Each morning when she returned to the blind, she noticed subtle changes. His limbs thicker, his gait more confident, the hollow beneath his ribs now filled out with muscle. His coat had taken on a healthy sheen, darker and more defined, no longer the dusty tangle it once was. But with growth came questions, and with strength came tension. At the den, the dynamic was shifting. Ranger still played with the kits, mock battles, that tumbled them through leaves and across roots, but his size made him clumsy. He knocked over his smaller siblings without meaning to. He barked when startled. His playful nips, once tolerated, now drew small yips of protest. Ruby noticed too. The fox mother had grown more alert, her gaze often flitting between Ranger and the forest. She still allowed him to sleep beside her, to share meals and grooming time, but Sarah could sense her anxiety simmering just below the surface. It wasn't mistrust, it was realism. The forest was changing. Coyotes had come closer. Their calls echoed at dusk, their prints now freshly pressed near the den. Sarah had even spotted mountain lion tracks just a mile south. This fragile world, so carefully nurtured, was being watched by eyes that didn't care for miracles. Then came the day the hikers arrived. It started with laughter, a group of 4 winding along a nearby trail, unaware of the den nestled beneath, the oak roots. Sarah watched from her blind, heart racing. Ruby froze, ears pricked. The kits darted into the shadows, but Ranger barked. It was just one bark, loud, clear, canine. The hikers heard it instantly. "Did you hear that?" one of them called out. They turned toward the sound. Ruby bolted into the underbrush, her kits following in practiced silence. But Ranger hesitated. His instincts, torn between his fox family and his dog ancestry, clashed. He took a step toward the hikers, then back toward the den, unsure. His tail wagged once, confused. Sarah acted fast. She slipped from the blind and intercepted the hikers, camera hanging from her neck. "Sorry," she said with a polite but firm smile. "I'm photographing wildlife. Would you mind taking the upper trail instead?" They agreed, distracted by her explanation and the weight of their own gear. But the damage had been done. That evening, Sarah saw the shift. Ruby was distant. She cleaned the kits, but not Ranger. When he barked again, softly out of confusion, she turned away. The message was clear, even if her actions were gentle. Ranger's instincts didn't belong here. The next morning, the den was empty. Panic gripped Sarah as she scanned the area. Then movement, near a fallen log, far from the original site. Ruby had relocated her family. But the move had been difficult. One of the kits limped visibly, its hind leg favoring the ground. Ranger stayed close, nuzzling the injured sibling, his protective instincts in full bloom. Sarah documented quietly, but her heart ached. The wild was asserting its boundaries again. Later that day, a storm rolled in, fast and fierce. Wind whipped. Through the canopy, rain fell in sheets. Sarah took shelter in her blind, but her eyes never left the clearing. She saw Ruby gathering the kits, leading them toward a new den site between two boulders. But Ranger, larger now, bulkier, struggled to keep up. He couldn't fit through the same gaps. He slipped on slick roots. He barked again, a desperate sound that vanished into the storm. Ruby returned for him, again and again, nudging, urging. But she was also torn, her gaze darting back to the kits huddled beneath the rocks. Sarah saw it in every flick of her ears, every step she hesitated to take. It was the moment every mother dreads, the choice between one child and the others. Sarah couldn't bear it. She stepped from the blind, rain soaking her clothes within seconds. "Ranger," she called gently, her voice almost lost in the wind. The puppy turned. Recognition flared in his eyes. He bounded toward her, but stopped. He turned back, looking for Ruby. The fox was there, standing a few feet away. They looked at each other, and, in a single heartbreaking gesture, Ruby stepped forward and touched her nose to Ranger's. She licked his face once, slow, deliberate. Then she turned and vanished into the darkness, her kits following like shadows. Ranger whimpered, trying to chase. But Sarah knelt, opened her arms. "It's okay," she whispered. He came to her. That night, soaked and shivering, Ranger sat curled on the passenger seat of Sarah's truck. He didn't sleep. He just stared out the window, his eyes scanning the trees, ears perked for a sound that wouldn't come. Sarah drove him to the Pine Valley Veterinary Clinic. Dr. James Thompson examined him with quiet astonishment. "You wouldn't believe he's been in the wild," he said, running his hands over Ranger's ribs. "He's healthier than most dogs I treat." But health wasn't the issue. Back at Sarah's cabin, Ranger refused to eat. He sat by the window watching the forest, whining, waiting. 3 days passed. On the fourth morning, Sarah made a decision. She loaded Ranger into the truck and drove back to the forest. Maybe she thought he needed closure. Maybe Ruby would return. They hiked to the old den site. Ranger's nose picked up the trail immediately. He moved with urgency, pawing through brush, sniffing leaves. Sarah followed as he led her, through thickets, across streams, until they crested a small hill, and froze. Below them, at the base of a rocky outcrop, chaos was unfolding. 3 coyotes circled Ruby and her kits. The fox stood her ground, teeth bared, fur bristling. But she was outnumbered, and her injured kit stumbled behind her. Ranger didn't wait. With a fierce bark, he charged down the hill, all hesitation gone. Sarah's scream was lost in the wind, but Ranger didn't falter. He threw himself between the coyotes and the fox family, hackles raised, teeth snapping. The coyotes hesitated, thrown off by this new threat, and in that moment of hesitation, Ruby acted. She grabbed her limping kit and ran. The others followed, but one coyote lunged for the straggler. Ranger intercepted, clashing mid-air, teeth sinking into the coyote's muzzle. They wrestled, snarling, rolling through the dirt. Sarah arrived, shouting, throwing rocks. The coyotes, startled and outmatched, scattered. Ranger stood, blood dripping from a fresh gash on his shoulder. He looked back, not in pain, but in search of Ruby. She was there. She approached slowly, eyes soft, and in a gesture that would stay with Sarah forever, she licked Ranger's wound, then stepped back. She nudged him, toward Sarah, as if to say, "You're still family, but your place is no longer here." The drive back to Sarah's cabin was silent. Ranger lay curled in the passenger seat, the gash on his shoulder wrapped in gauze, his head resting on his paw. Outside, the forest slipped past like a fading memory. But inside the truck, something had shifted. he had chosen, or perhaps the choice had been made for him. Back at the Pine Valley Veterinary Clinic, Dr. Thompson stitched Ranger's wound with practiced hands. But it was the look on his face afterward that gave Sarah pause. "I ran a DNA panel," he said, gently cleaning the edges of the bandage. Out of curiosity, something about him felt off, in a good way. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Off? How? He's not a pure German shepherd. He's got about 15% wolf ancestry, likely the result of some old wolf-dog hybrid breeding program. Sarah blinked. It made sense now. His ease in the wild, the bond with Ruby, his instincts that danced between protection and silence. Ranger wasn't just caught between two worlds emotionally. He was genetically suspended between them. Back at the cabin, Ranger still refused to settle. He paced by the window, ears twitching, gaze locked on the tree line. He'd saved his fox family, but now he couldn't reach them, couldn't protect them, and he couldn't seem to belong here either. Sarah's heart broke watching him. On the third night after another long stretch of restless pacing, she spoke softly. "You miss them, don't you?" Ranger whined and pressed his nose to the glass. The next morning, Sarah loaded up the truck again. This time, not just with Ranger, but with supplies, a field kit, and a quiet sense of purpose. They hiked deep, into the woods, retracing the paths Ranger remembered. It didn't take long for his nose to pick up the scent. He took off with quiet urgency, Sarah close behind. They crested a ridge and followed a narrow deer trail down to a low ravine. That's where they found her. Ruby stood at the edge of a shallow hollow, looking directly at Sarah as if she'd been waiting. Her kits, now larger, more coordinated, hovered behind her. But something was wrong. One kit, the smallest, the one Ranger had saved, lay motionless on the ground, its chest rising in shallow jerks. A wound near its hind leg was swollen, angry, red, infected. Ruby looked at Sarah, eyes wide, pleading. She wasn't just trusting her human friend, she was asking for help. Without hesitation, Sarah knelt, wrapped the kit gently in her jacket, and looked Ruby in the eye. "I've got him," she whispered. To her amazement, Ruby didn't resist. She stood firm as Sarah lifted the tiny body and turned back toward the trail. Ranger stayed close, head low, ears alert. He never looked away from Ruby. At the clinic, Dr. Thompson worked quickly. "This wound's been festering for days," he muttered. "Without antibiotics, he wouldn't have made it." They stayed 3 nights. Ruby, unwilling to leave her kit behind, did something that stunned even Sarah. She made a den in Sarah's backyard. Not hidden, not temporary. She moved in. Every day, she watched the clinic window from a patch of wild grass, the other 2 kits curled at her side. And every night, Ranger divided his time between lying on Sarah's porch and standing beside Ruby under the stars. On the 4th morning, the kit recovered. Weak, but alive. Dr. Thompson smiled as he handed the tiny fox back to Sarah. "Your backyard's becoming a nature reserve," he joked. But Sarah wasn't laughing. She was realizing something extraordinary. Ruby wasn't returning to the wild. She was building something new. The following days unfolded like scenes from a dream. Ruby brought the kits into the yard daily, teaching them to hunt field mice, to stalk sparrows from the edges of the brush. Ranger joined in, not as a dog, not as a fox, but as something uniquely his own. He taught them to bark at distant sounds, to dig deeper dens. In turn, they taught him silence, stillness, how to read the breeze and vanish into thickets. They weren't just coexisting, they were evolving, together. News of Sarah's discovery began to spread. She posted short video clips, never revealing exact locations, of Ruby and Ranger training the young kits together. The internet was captivated, but not all attention was welcome. Within weeks, Sarah noticed strangers lingering near her property line. A car parked too long, flashlights in the woods at night. One morning, a man posing as a wildlife journalist tried to offer her thousands for one of those genetically gifted kits. That same day, she installed cameras and called the authorities. But she knew this couldn't last. The story had grown too big. The world was watching, and some of it wanted to possess what it didn't understand. So she made a new choice. She reached out to wildlife sanctuaries, universities, conservationists. Not to give the animals away, but to ask for help building something sustainable. 2 days later, Dr. Elena Rodriguez arrived from the Cascade Wildlife Preserve, a 500-acre sanctuary known for its innovative cross-species rehabilitation programs. After reviewing Sarah's footage, she was stunned. "This isn't just a rescue story," she said. "This is evolution happening in real time." Together, they devised a plan. The preserve would construct a special zone, half forest, half open terrain with natural den structures and a secure perimeter. Sarah would be allowed to live on site in a small research cabin. Ranger, Ruby, and her kits would transition there slowly. The first visit was a test. Sarah brought Ranger. Ruby followed, and so did her kits. In the preserve's quiet woods, something clicked. The family explored with cautious joy, circling a large tree, testing the scent of unfamiliar soil. Ranger marked his new territory beside an older German shepherd named Marcus, the preserve's patrol dog. The two stared at each other for a long moment. Then Marcus lay down. Ranger approached, tail wagging, then nudged him gently. Marcus didn't resist. Sarah watched as Ruby's kits climbed over both dogs, yipping, tumbling, welcomed into a new, safer world. For the first time, Sarah exhaled. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something the world had never seen before. A new kind of family, born not from blood, but from choice. Two years had passed since that mist-covered morning when Sarah Mitchell first spotted a bundle of fur by the roadside. 2 years since a wild fox made a choice that defied instinct, and a lost puppy found a family he was never meant to have. Now, the Cascade Wildlife Preserve echoed with life born of that improbable beginning. Ranger, once frail and frightened, had grown into a powerful German shepherd with striking wolf-like features. But it wasn't his strength that defined him. It was the softness in his eyes when Ruby approached, the stillness in his body when fox kits climbed over him, as if he were the forest itself. Ruby had changed too. The fierce independence that once defined her had softened into something more nuanced, a leadership forged not just in instinct, but in cooperation. She no longer lived entirely in the shadows. Instead, she moved fluidly between wild and semi-domestic spaces, trusting Sarah in ways no one could have predicted. Their family had expanded. The original kits were now adults, roaming the preserve with confidence. One had established her own den nearby. Another remained close to Ranger, often curled against his side like a reminder of what had been risked and saved. Visitors came from around the world to see them, not just to witness an unlikely bond, but to understand what it meant. Researchers studied the kit's problem-solving abilities, noting enhanced social cooperation and unusual communication patterns. Children pressed their faces to the observation glass, watching Ranger teach stealth to foxes, and Ruby tolerate muddy paws on her back. One boy had asked, "Is Ranger a dog or a fox?" Sarah had smiled and answered, "He's both, and neither. He's family." She often reflected on that word, family, and how it had evolved for her. She had no children of her own, no partner back in the city. But here, in this patch of preserved wilderness, she had found a calling deeper than photography. She had become the silent link that made something unprecedented possible. A protector, a witness, a bridge. But the world beyond the preserve still pressed close. Offers came in. Lucrative, well-meaning and dangerous, genetic labs, exotic breeders, filmmakers. Everyone wanted a piece of the miracle. Sarah declined them all. Instead, she helped launch the Ranger Initiative, a research and rehabilitation program aimed at exploring interspecies cooperation, especially in hybrid and cross-species orphan care. It wasn't about creating new creatures. It was about learning to see old ones differently. One clear night, Sarah stood on her cottage porch, a mug of tea warming her hands. Ranger sat beside her, alert but calm. Ruby emerged from the trees, her second litter of kits tumbling after her. They greeted Ranger with delighted chirps. Ruby touched noses with Sarah, then lay down among the roots. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. They were rewriting the rules. As the stars bloomed above them and the wind whispered through pine needles, Sarah knew the story wasn't over. There were new challenges ahead, new species to rescue, new boundaries to cross. But for tonight, under the vast Montana sky, a woman, a fox, and a dog-wolf hybrid sat together, bound not by blood, but by choice, by trust, by love, and that, perhaps, was the most natural miracle of all.